All right, today on the Button Up Podcast, we have Robert Ordway from the Men's Insights, President and CEO of the multinational Men's Insights site. How are you today, Robert?
Doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we got connected through Menfluential. I know you knew Brock through what used to be StyleCon, but it looks like you have a pretty fascinating background. I watched your TED Talk today, and I always like to trace the dots looking backward as to how you got to where you are today, and then we can look a little bit forward. So I know you're a DC guy, but maybe we can start out with some of your earlier days.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, I was actually born in Portsmouth, Virginia, but I've spent the majority of my life in Northwest Indiana, about a half an hour away from Chicago. And it's interesting because Northwest Indiana is kind of this offshoot of the city. So when people think of it, it's like a big town, but the reality is it's the National Dunes Lakeshore, and it's steel mills, it's rustic, it's very industrial Midwest type Rust Belt. And so my childhood was very blue collar. My dad was a hunter and a fisher as well. So growing up, academics and books and things of that nature, not to mention, men's dressing up was definitely wasn't utilized at all. Whereas I think some of the more traditional values of manliness and leadership, and I think a culture of honor was kind of really prevalent in my family, having roots in Kentucky. So it's interesting to move to DC and be part of what some people call the East Coast elites, and being in a new subculture where folks are very professionally motivated, and I think they work a little bit too much. But I'd say as a Central Time guy, these East Coast folks, they like to wake up late and they also love to stay up late. So that's been the biggest challenge for me in the last year and a half, 2 years, is knowing how to sleep in and then stay up till 2 a.m. So I think I got more of a farm mindset where it's get up at 4:30 and in bed by 10. So
Oh, I'm with you on the farm mindset for sure. But what took you from Central to DC then?
well, my background has really kind of been a three-legged stool. From I call myself a child of the recession. So as the first kid in my family to attend college, I was very fortunate to receive the prestigious Eli Lilly Endowment, which is a full ride to anywhere in the state of Indiana. And that took me to Purdue originally, and then ultimately back to Valparaiso University, a small liberal arts college. But as the war in Iraq started in 2003, I was a DEP, it's called Delay Entry Program, for the United States Navy. And when I got that full ride, it was essentially, well, I guess I don't really need the military anymore per se. And I had all kinds of signing bonuses lined up, and I ended up going to college. But I sort of picked the wrong major. I picked finance because I had a fascination with how the economy works. And graduating in 2007 in December, that was pretty much right when the tail of the economy fell out. So I found myself completely unemployable in 2008, and I fell into politics by way of financial policy. And essentially, since the past decade has been kind of this, again, I call it the three-legged stool, where I've worked in government at the city, county, and state level. I have worked in the financial sector, in insurance, in financial services. And then my other part is probably more campaigning in running elections for myself as well as for other people, from low level to all the way to the national level. And so this menswear thing has always kind of been this little thing that's loomed around in the background for about 10 years. And after recently having owned a menswear retailer, I decided to move out to DC to go back into the political fray, seeing as there are a lot of opportunities out here right now.
How did you first get interested in menswear and style or that whole world if, it wasn't necessarily something that was handed down from your dad or your family?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So growing up, and if you go back to Tanner Guzzi, and he talks about the archetypes, and I completely buy into his mindset, his philosophy and views as written in the Appearance of Power. My dad, probably would have considered him an alpha male of some sort. Steelworkers tend to be definitely more masculine and dominant than most. But growing up, most of my clothes were purchased from Walmart, and my hunting clothes that my dad bought were either from the Salvation Army or from friends of friends, and they were oftentimes 4 times too big. And I was told that I would, quote unquote, grow into them, which never happened. So at an early age, I went to the mall and I had this interest in clothing, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I obviously, being from the working class, couldn't afford anything at the mall. And this is at the time when Jinko jeans and mid late 90s are coming about, rock stars and all that. And obviously, I wanted to be like my favorite X Games superhero, Dave Mira, and those types of folks. But when I went to college as an engineering major originally, and then I pivoted to finance, I immediately was told, hey, you need to learn how to tie a tie. Well, my dad passed away when I was 18 years old, and when we buried him, he didn't even have a dress shirt. His idea of dressing up for a family function at Thanksgiving or Christmas was wearing a Dale Earnhardt crisply new black T-shirt. That cost about $40 back then. And so I found myself in this unique position where I needed to do something but had zero training. And so it was about 2006, 2007 when I picked up GQ and Esquire magazines, but I really found them to be unhelpful. And I don't mean to speak ill of any publication, but when it's a Dolce and Gabbana sport coat for 2,500 bucks, and you need to be pretty trim and 6'4" to wear it. I just didn't. I felt even more lost from the information that they were providing, and so it really wasn't until the end of my undergrad days when I came across the book Dressing the Man through a Google search, and then all the math and science in my left brain, it all just came together and it all made sense. And lo and behold, about a year later, I'm in Brooks Brothers shopping, and while I was helping customers, because there were lots of men in there struggling, the manager came up to me and said, how did you know that the button-down polo collar came out in 1896 by us? And I said, well, I read the book Dressing the Man and Generations of Style. And she goes, when can you start? And I said, well, never really thought about working in retail. She goes, well, you get 60% off. And I said, when do I start? So that was really the segue into a seasonal position back when I was in grad school studying policy. And from there, it's been something where I've helped friends, helped family, and I think it's because it's the opposite of my childhood in nature, to be white collar, to wear a tie, that I find it to be inherently seductive, I guess.
That's really interesting. And you do seem to, at least, well, maybe we only hang out in, more formal environments, but you do seem to like dressing up a little bit compared to, I'd say, the average older millennial.
Yeah. Well, I think from what I learned is in dressing well doesn't necessarily mean dressing up. And I always tell people, specifically men, young men, that you want to dress one level better from everybody else, and maybe that is up, but you don't want to peacock too much, or as I always say, you don't wear a tuxedo to your 2-year-old niece's birthday party, right? I mean, there's a misalignment there. But if you're wearing that lapel flower, or you've got that fun pocket square, or that old pocket watch that hangs out from your vest, those are the little details that people, particularly women for sure, take notice in. And what I find, I'd say one of my biggest struggles since then is in the DC world, I'll meet several people at a happy hour, what have you, and later on, weeks or months later, people come up to me, hey, Robert, how's it going? And I have absolutely no idea who they are, but they remember me because of the way that I dress.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if you could, transitioning a little bit, but I wonder if you could tell us about your time running the menswear boutique, Rusted Oak, how you got into that, and how it went.
Yeah. So I was working in county government. What was I doing? I was in sales, I believe, at the time. And the clothing store that was in my community for about 30 years was getting ready to close up shop. And the mayor came to me because he was personal friends with the owner and said, "Hey, Robert, you've always wanted to be more of an entrepreneur, and the mayor is I'd consider him a religious, a business, and a political mentor on many levels. Amazing human being, and trust his insights and guidance and what have you." And he goes, you may want to go talk to the owner and see if he's interested in maybe transitioning. Again, if this is something you want. And I immediately was like, "Oh, this would be great." So I talked to the owner, and like any entrepreneur, you want your blood, sweat, and tears out of the business and cash yesterday. And unfortunately, in the retail world, it just doesn't work like that. How much of the merchandise is stale, has been sitting around, hard to sell, maybe not trendy or what have you. So what I ended up doing is I talked to a lot of people and I said, this is something I'd like to pursue and would be interested if I needed some partners because I had some capital, but I didn't have the full lot because the inventory is a major lift to be able to purchase. And menswear only makes about keystone, which is essentially double your money from a gross margin standpoint. So that means that, if you buy for 50 cents, you sell for $1, but then you got to back out, your visa fees, your shipping, your packaging, and all these other things. And you find out that you really don't make that much money. But essentially, I wrote out a business plan. It was about 60 pages deep. I refined it over the course of a year. I went to a few friends as silent investors, and I put together the concept. I found a marketing firm that I knew, like, and trusted. I explained my vision to them, and they were able to create the concept. So I came up with the name Rusted Oak, and everyone seems to think that it was based on my initials, Robert Ordway. That is not the case, but our logo kind of looked like a monogram, so it was fitting. But taking it from an idea to reality is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And to be able to go to market, to deal with 300 vendors, trying to understand what your market is by far the most difficult if you don't have a pre-existing business. So the buyer of the other store ended up going and working for a competitor about 15 miles down the road, and he had 40 years of buying experience. So he had a fingertip feel for what the market was. And what you learn in retail or menswear, whatever it may be, is that you don't dictate your market market dictates you. And so I took a lot of input and feedback from the community, but just like in political polling, a sample set of 30 or 300 may not really be relevant to the overall atmosphere. So I tried to be all things to all people in about 1,300 square feet, and that was kind of not the right approach. And the challenges in my community was really the biggest challenge of it, because I had all races, religions, cultures, creeds, age groups, conservative, liberal, tall, short, skinny, not so skinny, and so there was an eclectic demographic, but it was also somewhat rural. So the whole county only had about 150,000 people, and we're about an hour away from Chicago. And New Yorkers would fly in and see my store, and they're like, "Robert, this is the most beautiful store we've been in. What the heck are you doing in Indiana? This should be in Dallas or Austin." And lo and behold, when I made a trip to Dallas to see family a few years ago, I ran into a store called Q Clothier, Rye 51, and I kid you not, it was identical to my concept and brand. So I guess the short story long was understanding retail, going to market, knowing what to buy, who you're buying it for, being able to get the margins right, being able to turn the inventory. So as the seasons go out, you've got to be able to get rid of this stuff, mark it down, maybe take losses on it, maybe write it off and give it away to a thrift, 2 or 3 hours away from your store. But it's a major task to try to do sales, marketing, operations, doing tuxedos for graduations, doing wedding parties. And so I would consider it, I was probably working about 100, 120 hours a week. And I kind of lived at the store for the most part. It has been the most life-changing experience for me. I ended up shutting it down because of the revenues versus the margins versus my happiness was out of line. But I don't regret it for a minute. And I truly believe that it is really given me a deep level of respect for people who are in and around the retail game, like restaurateurs or any sort of retail where you're dealing with customers and product and value. So,
And did you? How long did you do that for?
I had it open for about a year and a half.
Okay. And would you ever consider something like that again, or would you take a totally different approach?
I think looking at the way a young man here who is in his 60s owns a women's boutique here in Crystal City, and I met him in the locker room at the gym, and I said, "Hey, you got a nice shirt and tie." And he goes, "Oh, that's great." I'm like, "I used to own a clothing store." He goes, "I do own a clothing store." And he asked me when I owned it. I said 2015 and 16. He goes, "I've been in the business 45 years, and you probably couldn't have been in the industry starting at a worse period of time in life." And I was like, "Well, that makes me feel better, right?" And he explained the challenges in the women's wear. And when I look at it in retrospect, how Amazon and millennials now are now the largest, working group in America, largest voting base, now having children, student debt. We communicate differently, we consume differently. Everything needs to be driven around experience, and I tried to do that in the store, but I had challenges with like the government when I wanted to do like whiskey tastings and things of that nature. So I wouldn't do a straight retailer ever again, but I do believe that pop-ups or showrooms are the way of the future. I don't think that you can eliminate brick and mortar entirely. I think the strategy is to be Amazon, start in digital and go brick and mortar, as opposed to the Walmart model, which is brick and mortar and trying to go digital. Because when you have the data like Amazon does, when you open your brick and mortar, you already have reams of data on exactly what every person purchases, not only through you, but through your affiliates. And you can either backdoor them with your own product, like Costco does with their Kirkland brand, or you can source exactly what people are interested, and you can experiment with very little risk. Whereas when I opened my store, I opened up and really, to be honest, didn't know what would happen. And when you look at the cost of goods of menswear, there really isn't a lot of margin to go with. And I see the future of the industry being private label or more niche brands. And the proof in the pudding in that, even at the lower level, is both Walmart and Target have decided that they were going to start their own men's lines so that they can create more margin from themselves instead of selling someone else's identity.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you see, like with Target with Goodfellow, it seems to be doing really well. Like it's gotten really popular, and because there's still, I mean, it's not like high quality clothing, but it's on trend, and it's kind of universally flattering for most guys, and it's super super affordable for even though it's not high quality, it's valuable. So yeah, I agree. That's definitely the future.
The disruptors allow, I think at the end of the day, the disruptors like an Amazon, I don't think they'll take over the world per se. I think there's a lot of different niche markets. And to be honest, some of the independent menswear stores are doing better than ever because of that crave for a personal relationship, or, a clothier for many men historically has fallen underneath the role of, who are the most five important other men in my life. It's my pastor, my lawyer, my doctor, my accountant. And your clothier was like essentially number five. It was a person that you knew for years and you introduced your son to. And so there's something to be said for building the personal relationships, especially in the custom clothing world. But where the customer is really going to win today is as folks understand the supply chain around the world in manufacturing, it will allow more private labels to sprout up. But what that does is it lowers the cost. So let's just use Walmart, for instance, or let's use Nordstrom. So just trying to think of a brand that's over there. Brax Feel Good. They're a newer pant that's out. But let's say that Nordstrom buys for 50 cents and they try to sell for $1. If I go to the manufacturer that's making that pant and I say, you know what, I don't want to do Brax, for instance, and I don't want to buy it from them for $50 in Robert's clothing store. I'd like to create Robert's brand, right? And they say, okay, well, our cost is $30. Well, I spend $30 on that pant, and now I can get, if I want to get Keystone, I'd retail it for what, 60. But let's say I want to do, 3 times, I can retail it for 90. So I'm selling it for less than my competitor, and it's the same quality. So at the end of the day, the retailer or the brand is going to get more in their bottom line. I think a good example of this would be Thursday Boot Company, or who's that other boot company? Gosh, you're always on my website. Or on
Taft.
yeah, Taft, right? So those companies are able to offer you essentially a $600 boot for half the cost. They get to put more money in their pocket. You get a much better product. I think it's a win-win. And to be honest, I'm much like I'm a Raphael guy. I've always been a man of, high quality, low quantity. So I like to own a very few good things as opposed to a ton of disposable things. So I see the menswear industry getting better and better for everybody. And I think folks like you that have an audience have a real big opportunity to capitalize in different ways.
That's something that I slowly realized as you look at the brands that come out and say, we're cutting out the middleman. It's like you were the middleman that's getting cut out. And I think that ends up being a huge loss, because I now see a store like yours. I'm looking at the site online here, and it does look like a gorgeous store. I could see myself going to a store to hang out, like you're saying, a whiskey tasting and something, and so the timing thing aside, I think you had the concept too. We were just a little bit, you were like right in that too early, too late phase, but yeah, that's a gorgeous store.
Sure. I think what's really key for the future of showrooms is, again, men are, this will sound not politically correct, but men are simple creatures and have been for a very long time. And women tend to prefer to farm their clothing, so they will go to multiple stores to grab different pieces, and they don't look at the mannequins. They're very individualistic and creative. Men historically tend to go in there, point at the mannequin, grunt like a caveman, and like, I want that, and be done with it. They don't want to necessarily experiment, or they just want the answers. I want to cheat on this test and let's be done with it. But so there's, even though there's an interest of more younger men in more androgynous approach, they still want the customer service experience, especially from a professional. And again, this is why people go to your websites, because they're looking for that knowledge base. But the reality is that there's something about the way of men, and maybe this ties back into maybe Ryan Mickler, but men inherently are still kind of tribal. So when you have that whiskey bar, or maybe in the background you have a few of your artist buddies, doing an event. I mean, events are what young people live for. It's going to be the experience. Starbucks started to do that, but I have friends in Chicago who run a penthouse next to the Board of Trade, and they do events with like magic shows. And for $50, you're getting a hand rolled cigar that you get to smoke outside on the balcony. You get, McClellan, 15-year, scotch, and, they're auctioning off paintings, and they're going to donate some money to some, do good charity for poor children. And so, and it brings together also unlikely tribal groups, maybe politically, maybe racially, what it would look like. But the having a meeting place beyond a WeWork, there's a lot of value for that in the future of menswear. And that company down in Dallas, Rye 51, they kind of are trying to build out that footprint. But I would say most men that I know that are in the custom clothing quasi retail space, they're only able to do one store. So it is a little bit scalable, or it's hard to scale unless you can truly find people that are, one, you can trust, and two, are willing to have that entrepreneurial mindset. And to be honest, it's a lot of hard work. So.
Yeah. I was just talking to Jeff, the CEO of Peter Manning, about this, like the whole idea of going digital first and then having some sort of physical presence, but really keeping it under control. Because I think when you see brands that kind of blow out the showroom experience, like Bonobos or Warby Parker, it's so hard to control your brand when you have 75 showrooms in different states and countries. One bad employee, or one kind of underwhelming location, or maybe the decor is not right, or maybe you walk into a Bonobos and there's nobody in there, and it's not what you thought it was going to be. Versus if you have like a really slick online presence, and then one or two very well done showrooms that really represent your brand well, they match up with your online presence. That seems to be the way to go.
No doubt. And looking at franchises is a good example. I would use the Catholic Church as a very successful franchise, in terms of they have a unified ideology, but at the end of the day, the decisions for each sermon, right, are made at the local level. And that's how McDonald's operates. You'll see like Buffalo Wild Wings, they'll have different sports pictures depending on the location, right? You're not going to put Green Bay Packers down in Chicago Bears land, right? And so in the men's clothing space, I see the same thing, where you want to have the consistency, but just like politics, it's all local, and you want it to have that cultural feel. And that's something that's fairly difficult to pull off as a CEO who's from a certain place, who, again, we all have our own kind of biases that we were born, raised, and even educated with. So, when you do pick out those brick and mortar locations, one, as my mentor always said, his dad started a retailer back in the day and was essentially put out of business by Walmart. He said, Robert, understand how much it costs you to turn that key every day. And that's something that digital people tend not to have to think about is, okay, well, I have an employee in here. Okay, well, I pay their FICA tax up to X amount of dollars. I pay for workers' comp and that's a fee. So before they even work a day, an hour in their life, you already have an investment. Okay, what's the heating, the air conditioning? What is the insurance on the inventory and the space? What is the build out cost? And when people go into that brick and mortar space, they have to be very cautious of, is this branding, is this identity creating an ROI, or is it needed just to create the pomp and circumstance, which, most brands tend to have a, or at least they think so, a brick and mortar in, New York and Manhattan to be like, hey, we've made it. We're able to spend zillions of dollars on rent. So that must mean that, it's kind of a fake it till you make it kind of mentality. But, being frugal, I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint is so critical when venturing out into those brick and mortar locations.
Yeah, I agree. So, what did you do immediately after closing down the shop, and what?
So I've been spending, I would say, life is lived in forward but analyzed in reverse. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about, entrepreneurship, what I did right with the store, what I did wrong. And, again, you only learn from your failures. You don't learn from success, because success could be pure luck in life. And when I moved out to DC, I knew that I needed to make money, have a career, and figure out what is the shortest path to going back to becoming an entrepreneur. And that's really what goes through my head every day is how do I get back to being able to throw money at an idea and living a passion and a dream in and around the menswear space. So I knew right away that I wasn't going to do anything local in Northwest Indiana based on my skill set and background. So, with a changing regime in DC, I had a lot of contacts out here. So it led itself to kind of the path of least resistance, like an electron, right? And I moved out here, one, because I'm younger, I'm single. This is, one of the probably most motivated, ambitious places on earth. Maybe a little bit too much in some cases, but at the end of the day, we all pick our friends and our jobs, and we surround ourselves with the average, right, of the 5 people we're around. So DC has allowed me to see our politics from a different perspective, see cultures, religions. It's been really great. And I work on the periphery of the political sphere. So I've got a leg into it, but I'm not like working for Congress or the president or someone who kind of sleeps, eats, and breathes it every day. But what's really neat is that because DC is gentrifying so much, the the city, as well as kind of Nova and then Maryland, the menswear place is kind of exploding here. It's always been kind of an untapped market, but remember, this is a place where nobody's wearing a polo on Capitol Hill. I mean, you have to wear a tie. It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit organization, a think tanker, whatever walk of life you come from, you're going to wear a tie. And so, with all this money that's moving in, I personally don't know where it's coming from, but it's a swell of opportunity in the menswear space to be around a diverse group of people, which I find to be fun, but to see how I can carve out a niche market in that space. So the goal right now is to work, in government slash politics slash policy, whatever that, space looks like, but continue to work on Capitol Hill Clothiers on the side, which is a little custom clothing brand that I cooked up, as well as working on Men's Insights. So the clothing is very localized, but Men's Insights is very generic and very national, or very unbranded, I guess you could say. But my gut tells me that I should focus more on the local, because to me, the space of the menfluential folks is somewhat limited, and you got to really figure out how you're going to carve out your niche. So for instance, for you, right, the men of modest height, that's a great niche to be in, that you started from ground zero. But to do another men's branding, you gotta be, I think, first in the space, or you need to be willing to commit a lot of time and energy for a long time before you really see an ROI. So for instance, if I want to copy Aaron Marino or Art of Manliness, I mean, these guys have a decade in the game, both of them, as of this year. So it's going to take a year just to track on Google and imagine a lot of dollars just to get in that space. Not to deter anyone from doing it, but know that getting into it is, Rome wasn't built in a day, that's for sure.
Yeah, you definitely have to find the differentiator for you. So are you working politically in the retail fashion space, or you're focused on your clothing company? Because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I really have a interest in the private labeling. I don't really want to be in a manufacturing capacity right now, so I have a really good, what they call CMT, cut, make, and trim shop that does my custom clothing. And so I'm just really trying to build on that and take the money to continue to build out a personal brand in public speaking. I think what's really unique about me, if that's even plausible, is that I've done so many different things in life. And so it's hard when you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, it's hard to figure out what the heck to do. So in the menswear space, I'm trying to use my foot in politics to dress up, to dress men better, to do more public speaking. For instance, this morning I got an email about a gala that's going to be later this month, and a organization reached out and said, we'd love to send a blast email to all of our folks. Would you be willing to write a 500 to 700 word blog post on, the do's and don'ts or what they should be wearing to this black tie affair? And it was, a very humbling ask, and so I feel, a commitment and obligation to help other men, but it's great to be kind of in that political space because in DC, it's all about who you know and it's about networking. And so if you dress one step better than everybody else, it's a lot easier to grow it as opposed to the old school direct sales method where, you just pick up the phone and dial for dollars and strangers to meet with you. It's a little easier to build a brand because everybody is inherently social, whether it's real or there are fake people here too. So just trying to build money on that side, but I'd really love to support more brands at Menfluential. I don't see myself being a short little Irishman. I don't see myself being the face of a brand per se, like Brock, like Aaron, like Antonio. I see myself more as a number two who's able to maybe support those brands through content creation, strategic marketing, things that would help them scale their business. It's not anything that they can't do, but it's something that they should switch to what I call in the book, the E-Myth. They want to work more on their business instead of in their business. And if I can help support any of those guys in that way, that I think that would be my contribution to the industry.
That sounds great. Well, we actually have some rapid fire questions that just 1 or 2 word answers. If you're ready for that. All right.
Sure.
Oxfords or bro? Oh.
Hey, what kind of gun you choose? What kind of gun you choose?
I don't. Well,
We don't like to tell you about it before we ask.
Yeah.
That makes it fun.
all right. Oxfords or brogues?
Definitely brogues.
Morning shower or evening shower?
Morning shower.
Favorite Bond actor?
Bond actor. Oh my goodness. I can't even think of his name. From the 90s.
90s. Pierce
I'm losing
Brosnan.
it. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Nice choice. Cardio or lifting?
Definitely strength. Starting strength.
Starting strength. Chinos, jeans, or trousers?
Jeans.
Ooh. And then the last book you read?
Last book I read was Why Honor Matters.
Very cool. So I might have taken you for a trousers guy. It's interesting.
So you are falling into the trap that everybody else does, my Facebook persona, if you will, and I'm usually dressed up in a lot of different things, but never underestimate, remember my blue collar upbringing when it comes to, I guess, manliness and rugged outdoors type stuff. I still love to go back to jeans, although they were, when I was growing up, if you remember the Levi's hard jeans, the commercial was the jeans cutting, they were treating them like a saw and they were cutting through wood. I hated jeans as a kid, but I have fallen in love with them. But I see more and more entrepreneurs these days, especially in the Midwest, where they wear quality denim with a sports shirt and sport coat. And I wore a pair of denim when I was at Menfluential on the first day.
I know. I think some of the new denim brands that are popping up are really exciting. These kind of DDC, smaller brands. Some really cool stuff going on in there.
Well, there's more and more handmade stuff out there. I think Japan and California are probably the bulk of the business. It was unfortunate to hear that White Oak in North Carolina was finally shutting down their shop. They were kind of the crown jewel for America's denim manufacturing, but there's only about a handful of manufacturers worldwide, and so like anything else, there's a lot of branding out there. But it's interesting to see that the stretch denim is really, it's not dominating, but it's growing extremely fast.
Oh yeah, even with like cone denim and kind of like higher quality denim that's marketed to people who are into raw selvage. Even that has 2% elastane, or I mean, almost everything is stretch. It seems like.
Sure. Well, coming back to retail, the thing is that the male body used to be, let's dial it back 50 or 100 years ago in this country, white male, 6 foot, maybe blue collar, maybe white collar, but he only weighs 180 pounds. He's a trim guy because it's a different time. And so wearing the Brooks Brothers sack suit fit everybody. But now we have the bell curve. We have the obese folks who have no butt and maybe all gut. And then on the other end, I call it the millennial generation. You have guys for the first time, in my opinion, in American history that have a skinny waist, huge butt, hips, and thighs from all their squats and deadlifts. And retail cannot create a pair of pants that fit men without them, to be honest, being shaped like women. I mean, if you got a 28-inch waist and a 38-inch hip, it's not going to work. And so the only way to kind of resolve this as millennials seek tighter fitting garments is to add stretch. So it's sort of in many ways a natural progression. And so you see athleisure where growing in many ways. And as a guy, think about it, we're all about function over fashion. And so if you have a sport shirt or a pair of jeans that, you could, go casual and dress up, I mean, that's just helps you be more of a minimalist.
Yeah, I like the trends. I think it makes sense, to kind of cater to guys' desire to be comfortable. I'm totally on board with that. I wish there were more options for the shorter man in the athleisure space, because that's I think guys are still, while a lot of guys are kind of on board with tailoring and fit these days, I think it's still kind of weird to get anything that's more casual tailored.
I agree. And I think, I'm a little bit taller than you and a little bit bigger build, but I find it interesting. And I think one of the challenges that our country is getting a little bit more overweight. And so the retailers are making things big. I've really enjoyed Brooks Brothers Red Fleece line, which has become more trim and as opposed to the box fit. But the reality is I wear a small in some clothing brands and an extra small, which, at 5'7", 165, I'm not exactly what I'd consider petite by any means. And so when it comes to cardigans, or I'd say the hardest thing to find on earth is like a pair of joggers. If you're short and trim, there's no pair of joggers that aren't, bunched up to your knees. So, and then they're hard to alter, right? I mean, if you find a beautiful hand knit sweater and you go to a tailor and say, hey, I need 3 inches taken off the sleeve from my 31-inch arms, they're going to laugh at you. That's hand knit. You can't just chop it off and restitch it, So I feel you when it comes to more of the casual wear items and not being able to find the right size or fit, but also just the complete lack of ability to alter.
Totally. Feel your pain.
All right, Robert. We're looking forward to seeing how you grow your brand, and I think it's really cool to see some of the behind-the-scenes stuff as you're talking about, supporting maybe some bigger brands and that type of thing. So people can connect with you on, is the best place maybe LinkedIn or somewhere on Instagram?
Yeah, I would say robertordway.com, mensinsights.com. My handle on Instagram is still Rusted Oak. I still have an innate desire to somehow build out that brand in a different way going forward, but those are probably the best ways.
Great. Well, looking forward to following that and then hopefully checking in with you maybe at Menfluential next year.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me on the show, John.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Buttoned Up Podcast, a collaboration between John Shanahan of The Cavalier and Brock McGough of Modest Man, and we will see you next week.